Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Work From Home Show. Shout out to all our homies, homeboys, homegirls, home trans, all the work from homers out there. I'm Naresh. Today we have Edward Dowd on the show. He is currently a founding partner of Finance Technologies, which is a global macro alternative investment firm. He is also the author of the new book, which I have sitting right in front of me. It's called Cause Unknown: The Epidemic of Sudden Death in 2021 and 2022. And we can add 2023 to that list too. The book came out in 2022. Edward Dowd has worked on Wall Street most of his career, whereas I started out my career working on Wall Street. He has worked in credit markets, equity markets. I was a former equities research analyst. Some of the firms he worked for include HSBC, Donaldson Lufkin and Jenrette, and Independence Investments. Most notably, he worked at BlackRock, which we're going to talk about a little more during the interview. He was a portfolio manager there. BlackRock is the largest asset manager in the world. He managed a $14 billion growth equity portfolio for 10 years. After BlackRock, he founded Ocean Square Asset Management. Edward Dowd, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show.
Thanks for having me today, Naresh.
Pretty storied Wall Street career, something that I was not able to accomplish, and I'm really happy I didn't. Turned somewhat political commentator as well. I did see you on a few, I think you were on Fox, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe you've been there several times, Fox Business, Fox News. Let's first talk about your Wall Street career. I gave a rundown of all the great names, HSBC, of course, BlackRock. Just give us a quick rundown how you ended up on Wall Street and your experiences there.
Yeah, so right after college, I managed to get a job that normally you need an MBA to get. I became an institutional fixed income salesperson for HSBC in Chicago. I spent 5 years there, and it was quite an education. I mean, I was there in the early 90s, 90 to 95. And I saw, I got my first taste of fraud and nonsense on Wall Street. I saw Kidder Peabody blow up. They hid trades in the drawers. I saw Orange County go down. At Orange County, there was a scandal in California where the gentleman who managed the pension fund blew it up. And I was at HSBC and the most productive salesperson.
I've got a quick question. I hate to interrupt you, but how do you blow up a pension fund? Aren't those investments supposed to be like pretty standard, safe investments?
Oh, you got to remember this was the beginning of derivatives and mortgage-backed securities and packaging of everything and slicing and dicing of cash flows.
I didn't know state pension funds were in the. I heard of college funds getting a small percentage of the endowments, 5%, 10%, but I didn't know you could actually blow up an entire fund. But I'll let you finish.
Oh yeah, no, there was an investigation, and basically what that guy was doing, he was basically buying securities that had step maturity functions. So you could buy a 2-year piece of paper, get a higher yield, and if interest rates went higher, the length of the duration of that security would extend. So in a low interest rate environment, that worked great, and he was reaching for yield and getting better yield than most of his other competitors around the nation. And I watched the salesman in San Francisco make a ton of money. The salesman didn't do anything wrong. He just sold them a bunch of stuff that guy shouldn't have been buying, and there were billions of dollars invested in that stuff. So, I just knew something was interesting on Wall Street, that there was a lot of Wall Street's about making money, and it's about asymmetric information. So the people creating all those bonds had a better, and you got to remember, computers weren't as sophisticated as they are now. So Wall Street had an information edge, and they sold bonds that they knew how to price, and the buyers didn't know how to price. And there you have it. I mean, that's called the bid-ask spread. You would create the security at, say, $2 and sell it to the client at $3, and that's a big profit. I'm just making numbers up off the top of my head. Then I went back to business school, and then after business school, I went to Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette to become an equity analyst in the electric utility department. And that was 1997, and right down the hall from me were the internet folks, and I watched that fraud unfold. And that was the due diligence fraud. Basically, investment banks used to do what's called due diligence before they would IPO a company. Little things like cash flow and revenues. And you got to remember back then there were IPOing companies that had eyeballs, and so they kind of threw out the standard.
Yeah.
The standard, and so a bunch of companies were IPO'd. The stock price went up. Everybody was happy, but then when they blew up, they went to zero. So that was, and there were a lot of rules and regulations that came out of that. There was also massive fraud I saw at Enron, WorldCom, Quest.
I was going to say, if you did electric utilities, and you probably were very involved with Enron.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I was working for Jay Dobson, who was the electric utility analyst, and next to us was the natural gas guy analyst and his associates, the juniors. I was a junior, and they covered Enron. And this young kid from Yale, an Irish kid, he's like 22. He comes into my office like 2 years before Enron blows up because they were doing a banking deal for Enron. He said in his Irish brogue accent, "Eddie, I swear to God, they're cooking the books. It's fraud." So, and we all looked at him like he was insane. So, I know how the sausage is made. And then I went back. Then I parlayed that job. I went up to Boston, got what's called a job on the buy side as a technology analyst. Right in 1999, watched that whole thing blow up. I managed to make a name for myself because I was just a cynic, and then I parlayed that into a portfolio management job at BlackRock in 2002. And so when the great financial crisis came, my team and I saw that coming a mile away, and we did the best we could to steer our fund through it. And so I've seen fraud after fraud after fraud on Wall Street. And that's kind of, and the Federal Reserve boom and bust cycle is basically a fraudulent, it always ends in fraud somewhere, something going to excess and blowing up. And that's kind of the cycle of the Fed rate hike cycle. And right now we're going to see, I think, sovereign country fraud. We're going to see somebody blow up because the game went from corporate fraud to bank fraud. Now we're doing central bank and sovereign fraud, and that's going to come home to roost at some point, I think.
Yeah, we're not going to get into Federal Reserve too much here, but what I do want to hone in on is your time in BlackRock. How long were you there?
I was there 10 years, and I get asked a lot of questions about BlackRock, and BlackRock grew through acquisition. So when I joined them, they were a small firm, relatively speaking, like something like 600 employees. Eventually, through acquiring Merrill Lynch Asset Management, then Barclays Asset Management, which is really where all the passive ETF investing goes on. It was a good firm. Everybody I knew was into what's called active investing, where people try to create alpha and pick stocks, a portfolio that beats the market. Well, somewhere along the line, they realized the trend was the market share was going to passive indexing. And so they bought Barclays, and that's when the firm kind of changed, jumped the shark, and I became, I used to know everybody at the firm, or not everybody, but a lot of the senior people. Then I became employee 5261, and the firm changed, and I ended up leaving in 2012. And then they kind of basically turned their back on what's called active management, where portfolio managers and analysts pick the stocks. And they de-emphasized that business. And so, go 11 years later, whatever the firm is now is not the firm I was at. And a lot of the controversy that surrounds them is how they vote the shares. And this is key to understand. I used to vote the shares in my portfolio. I had a co-portfolio manager. We would vote the shares, the proxy shares, however we saw fit. And usually it was, to try to, not let management get away with, excessive bonuses and or, pad the board with all their cronies. You roll forward, and most of the shares that BlackRock owns today are called passive, and so there's no portfolio manager per se votes on that. It's an executive committee at the top of BlackRock, and the same thing happens at State Street and Vanguard. So Charlie Munger has said basically in an op-ed like a year ago that there's too much power in too few hands, and that's where the controversy is really swirling around BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, is that they have too much unfettered power in too few hands. Potentially, I mean, I have no proof of wrongdoing or undue influence, but where there's too much power, usually things can go wrong.
Well, you helped answer my follow-up question. What I keep hearing about and reading about, and I thought maybe you could help debunk, maybe it's a conspiracy theory, maybe it's not, but the Chinese Communist Party, were they a huge investor in your funds? Are they still currently one of, if not the biggest investor in BlackRock? Investor meaning dumping a lot of money into BlackRock?
When I was there, that wasn't going on. So I can't speak as to what's going on today. I have no idea whether that's true or untrue. What I can say is there, when something like, I live on Maui, and Hawaiian Electric stock is down 65%. So everyone says BlackRock is one of the biggest shareholders of Hawaiian Electric, and they're responsible for this. Well, that's kind of, for me, knowing how Wall Street works, BlackRock didn't set up the disaster in Maui. It's just BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard basically are the three largest asset managers. Yep. They literally own every stock. So there's a misconception. I'm not going to say BlackRock is.
Well, it's not about owning stocks. It's about the percentage. If you look at the percentage that BlackRock owns of the shares outstanding, they're generally like top 2, top 3. You look up.
Yeah, no, and back in the day, Fidelity used to have that pole position. When I was managing money, Fidelity always basically owned 15% of almost every stock in the country.
Yep.
And now that's shifted to BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And so, yeah, they're top holders, but so the question is, do they, control the company? And I would say, maybe on a shareholder vote situation, maybe Larry could make a call into someone, but there's no proof of that. And I'm not defending anything, or especially their ESG policies, which I think they're even starting to back away from. It's kind of interesting. I think we're at peak ESG, honestly.
Well, the policies that I was specifically going to pinpoint, number 1 is ESG, number 2 is DEI, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. But those are the two voting issues that I just feel like, why is BlackRock even taking a stand on these? I mean, someone's got to be telling the BlackRock voters on the boards to push such programs. But if you say that they're scaling back on it, I
don't know. I just read a report today that they have a PR nightmare, and you got to understand how well you remember you worked on Wall Street. Like money, yeah. It's about money, and I think now that they know that this is people in different state pension funds are now divesting from BlackRock, and that is a problem for BlackRock. So if this is turning into a PR nightmare, I'm an analyst. I like to look ahead. So right now, Everyone's saying BlackRock is doing blah, blah, blah. Well, BlackRock isn't dumb. And a lot of these companies like Vanguard and State Street aren't dumb. Vanguard's out of China now. So people at the top are all about profits. And if this is going to hurt their profits, they'll pull a 180. And I think we've seen peak DEI, peak ESG, and we'll be talking about it for the next 5 years, but it's as far as I'm concerned, it's over and it's on the decline. Because look at Budweiser, that's the most egregious drop in market share ever for a consumer products company, and it's not coming back.
Disney also. You look at
Disney as well. Disney's like, this is having real world consequences, and it's been going on. It's like a virus and a cancer. It's been going on in the background. One of my insurance whistleblowers in my that helped me with my book, she was telling me they're all about DEI in their senior leadership team, and she's like, why are we doing this? We're an insurance company. No one cares about this. And they're spending millions of dollars on all this nonsense. And she said, and you know how this works. If we go into a recession and profits go down, one of the first things to get
Oh, yeah.
cut is this DEI
Absolutely.
nonsense.
We saw it with the new banking crisis earlier this year. That's what we saw. Those were the
Yeah.
first programs to get cut, because once you start running out of money, you start cutting things that are just completely irrelevant. Let's shift now, because you brought up, we talked about Disney, Budweiser, great examples. Vanguard has left China. Good. We've probably seen peak ESG, DEI, but what I don't see is peak COVID or peak mask mandates or peak vaccines. As we record this interview, mask mandates are back in some parts of the country. The government is now pushing for the new COVID booster shot. First off, how did you go from analyst on Wall Street portfolio, which you still are, you still work essentially not on Wall Street, but working in finance. Yep. How did you go from that to writing about COVID vaccines, which is, again, your book is titled Cause Unknown, the Epidemic of Sudden Death in 2021 and 2022?
Well, here's the interesting thing. I'm not a doctor or a scientist, nor do I pretend to be one. The book is about excess deaths, disabilities, and a mix shift from mostly old who died in 2020 to suddenly young people dying, especially those who are employed. And as a trend guy, a guy who understands statistics, my two partners come from finance world as well in Europe. They're PhD physicists, and we just analyze trends and we find statistical signals. And the signals here are so egregious and ridiculous that I started speaking out when I saw insurance company losses exploding in the beginning of 2022, not 2020, 2022. And especially in their group life area. And I saw funeral home companies taking off. So that Wall Street was giving a signal. And so we just started doing our own work. And we have on our website, financetechnologies.com, spelled with a PH, we have literally excess deaths for most of the Western world. We have disability data. We have absence and work time loss data. And something shifted in it all started in 2021. So in my book, I blame the vaccines. It's a thesis. I'm an investor. You're an investor. It's a thesis until proven wrong. That's what we're running with. And so far, as we roll through time, and since my book has come out, the evidence continues to accumulate, and it's bad.
I'm going to challenge you. And look, understand I'm on your side about 80% of the way, but I do want to challenge you. And people listening to this, I hate it when they say, "Oh, they're not doctors. They're not scientists." You have an equity research background. I do also. That's a very investigative background. I also have a journalism background. I've been following this from the start, from March, really from February 2020 onwards. And the most basic question that I have, and nobody's been able to answer it. No one's answered it. Maybe you have a good answer for me. I know we're seeing a lot of young, like you said, a lot of young people passing early, young men especially. We knew from day one that there was a myocarditis risk with these mRNA vaccines. And by the way, for those listening who are interested in this topic, we interviewed Dr. Robert Malone, who actually recommended your book on our show. We interviewed him earlier this year, and he gave some really good tips, including why everybody who got the mRNA should go see a cardiologist and get imaging done and testing, which I did. And I'm really thankful I did that, because some things were found, and I'm now on a good course of action. I'm 34 years old. But anyway, the people who are just suddenly collapsing, we've seen it in boxing, we've seen it in MMA. LeBron James' son a few weeks ago happened to him during a pickup basketball. I mean, these are like super healthy young athletes. This shouldn't be happening to that demographic, especially when the hospitalization rate, the death rate of COVID was zero for healthy people under the age of 40. Zero, not 0.1. It was closer to zero than it is 0.1. So I think there's one basic question here. And if the parents just came out and said, "Hey, my kid got the vaccine. This is the vaccine that they got," a lot of the questions would be answered. why aren't parents of those dying coming out and saying whether their children got vaccinated and which shot they got? And by the way, I got the J&J shot because I did not want the mRNA shot.
Yeah, so a lot of my friends who had the Hobbesian choice of having to take it to keep their job took the J&J. So I think that was probably the best one, to be honest. That's my personal opinion. Again, I'm not a doctor, but it was not mRNA.
Well, the doctors don't even know it. They know just as much as you. They just take whatever the CDC or NIH says or the WHO. But anyway, that's another point. So yeah, let's go back to these parents. Why aren't they coming out? Because now you have all these, if you want to call them conspiracy theories or just theories, the FDA can easily debunk this. The CDC can easily debunk these and say, hey, this kid wasn't vaxxed. He just collapsed from a heart issue.
Well, it's look, in my book, we don't go into like we have a lot of articles that we just basically through fair use repost without any commentary of just people who died suddenly. Then I talk about what we call the metadata. There have been some parents that have come out. They've been caught. A lot of them were immediately censored and deplatformed on Facebook. But, you got to understand something. This is a psychological problem as well. So, in business school, one of my professors said, you can't rationalize facts to someone whose position is based on emotion. And a lot of people got emotional about this, and there's the process of denial, anger, depression, and acceptance. And we're working our way through that process. And there's still, I'm amazed. I mean, you seem to be aware of what's going on, but there's so many people that are not aware, that consume mainstream media, and a lot of doctors still refuse to look at this. But I do believe that if you follow some of the metrics that we have at our website, word is spreading. When we started our website at the end of last year, it was getting 10,000 views a month. We're at 500,000 views a month now. So unfortunately, this has been suppressed by the mainstream media. It's kind of an underground word of mouth thing. My book is a bestseller, but it's being spread word of mouth. There's been no. I got on Tucker Carlson's Fox Nation, and then he got fired like 2 months later. I'm not suggesting it was me, but that's as far as I've gotten in the mainstream.
Well, this is what I can't stand about the corporate elitists and the administrative state. Like I said, all the CDC, FDA, NIH has to do is come out, put out a statement saying, hey, we understand these theories are going around. Here's why they're false. And I think just asking a question, I've been suspended by social media just for asking the question. And you wrote a book that's essentially one big question. Hey, this is a question that we have. Can somebody please answer it? And they're not answering it. And I feel like the authorities treat us like sheep, and the people can handle the truth. And maybe the truth is, like I said, hey, the vaccines had nothing to do with the collapse. LeBron James' son had some pre-existing heart condition that was never found, and so who passed had something else. But at least be transparent and tell us the truth. At least be transparent and tell us the truth about why the coronavirus, which has been around every year since the 1930s or so, all of a sudden mutated in 2019 to become a deadly virus. Like, do you really expect us to believe that some bat, it happened from a wet market? Like, just tell us the truth, and there are theories running around. Just tell us the truth, and they're not doing that.
Yeah, let me give you an analogy. So, I was there during the Enron fraud, and my firm owned it. I was the technology analyst, but had experience in utilities, and I went to the guy who covered Enron, and I said, hey, there's a lot of questions about fraud. The famous earnings call where Steve Chano said, you don't even have a balance sheet, you're a Fortune 500 company. And the stock, hit a high of 70. It was like around 40. And I managed to convince the electric utility analysts there that there was fraud. And when I was at Independence Investments, and we got out of it. And I talked, to a lot of people who still owned it. And the reason they still owned it is because they were talking to the CFO and the CEO because they were big shareholders, and those guys continued to lie through their teeth. And this is, when you commit a fraud or make a mistake that but let's use the word fraud or just the most ginormous mistake ever. Once you get caught, you're not going to admit it. You're going to continue as if everything's hunky dory, and you're going to push forward. And that's what the CEO and the CFO at Enron did. They didn't stop lying until they were in handcuffs. I mean, that's kind of what this is what we're seeing now globally. Is these authorities are just they see the data that we see, especially in the disability data, and they're silent because it's such a ginormous F up. It'll call into question all the institutions that we hold dear: the FDA, the NIH, the CDC, Congress, you name it. The media companies that push these lies, the doctors that fell for the FDA lies. This is a crisis, and they want to just continue along as if nothing's happened until the people rise up. And we're going to reach what I call the vaccine event horizon, where the disabilities, bodies, and injuries keep piling up to the point where it's going to become common knowledge.
Well, first off, usually I don't endorse political candidates, but right now there's one candidate running whose platform is to shut down the CDC, the NIH, the FDA, and he has and a bunch of other government we're talking specifically about the vaccines and COVID policy, and he has an entire diagram of how he's going to do it. So I highly recommend people go to vivek2024.com, VIVEK 2024.com. Check out what Vivek Ramaswamy is all about. But going back to people, look, people we're raised in an environment that is very sheep-like. You said a lot of these doctors don't look at the data. They refuse to look at the data. And that's partly because they're so used to being told what to do and to just believing what the authority says, what a Fauci will say, and that becomes the science, that becomes the law. I think that's really sad. We've lost our way as far as critical thinking goes. But my question for you, and I've seen this response, I don't know if it's real, but since you wrote the book on this, people have said, oh, the sudden death that you're seeing in 2021, 2022, 2023, the sudden heart attacks, the football players who are just collapsing on the field, this is not an anomaly. This has always been the case. It's just now those stories are getting more airtime. So people think more of it is happening. But in reality, if you look at the statistics, 2022, 2023 is no different from 2010, 2011. Like, this is just life for you. What's your response to that?
Well, look, that when the book was pitched to me and they wanted to talk about sudden athletic deaths, and I said, look, that's mostly anecdotal. Let's marry the two together with the metadata. And the metadata says that's the excess. Let's forget the sudden athletic deaths for a moment. The metadata, we have an excess death problem amongst millennials, especially, that continues to this day. We're still running at 23% excess death in the millennial age group, especially if you're employed at a Fortune 500 or mid-sized company. That's the latest whistleblower group life claims above, the prior 5-year average before COVID. So that is continuing. Let's look at the sudden athletic deaths. There was a study that in my book that I cite called the Lucerne study out of Switzerland that I think was conducted and compiled in 2006 and looked over the prior 38 years, and they categorized, sudden deaths, athletic deaths under the age 35 on the field or on the way to the hospital. And there were, on average, the total number they found were 1,101 over 38 years. So simplistically, if you just take that number divided by 38, you get 29 a year. So did it happen before? It sure did. I remember growing up, Len Bias collapsed. There was a cocaine issue, but Len Bias, that was a big news item, and that was rare. Now, you'd be lucky to have a month with just 29 sudden athletic deaths, and we've had months with over 100. So what's changed is the frequency. It's a phenomenon that did occur. I'm not denying it didn't. It's just that the frequency of it is such that it's 10, 20 times more than it was. And in my book alone, there's hundreds of examples, and that's intuitively something's changed. And then the metadata is just the data.
Are you publishing a lot of this data on your websites? And by the way, you brought up finance technology. That's PHINANCE, financeTechnologies.com. Is it all over there?
Yeah, oh yeah. We literally have. Let me just read you some of the projects that we've done. These are the titles. We have the V Damage project, where we take a stab at the total impact, injuries, disabilities, deaths. We have excess mortality project that goes through the USA, the UK, all of Europe, Germany, Australia, Ireland. Then we have the US Disabilities Project that goes into extensive detail. Then we have the US Absence Rates Project. This is all from the BLS, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. We have the UK Disabilities Project. We got from the personal independence payment system that we just dropped, and it's shocking. I'll just read you the statistics. These are new claims. New claims went up from like 2% in 2020, like 26% in 2021, and let me get you the exact numbers.
No problem. And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and plug your other websites as we wind down the interview. The book website is theyliedpeopledied.com. Theyliedpeopledied.com.
This is the UK Disabilities PIP project, personal independence payment. So we were able to get into human body systems and causes. We asked doctors to help us analyze this data once we collated it, because we're not doctors. But these are the numbers. So for total body systems, these are excess claims above normal. 3% in 2020, 20.5% in 21, and 76.7% in 2022. There's some categories that have exploded, like hematological, which is blood disorders, 522%. So something has gone on in the UK disability system, and we said, look, we believe it's the vaccine. If it's not, it's either someone please provide an explanation, or it's systemic fraud. And if it's fraud, the UK government should, at least, talk to us and maybe give us a consulting fee for saving them so much money. That's kind of what we said.
Yeah. Wow, that's really good stuff. Theyliedpeopledied.com. Finance Technologies, that's finance with a PH, technologies.com. Also your funds company, oceansquare.com. Edward Dowd, any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners, or anything else you want to promote?
Look, the thing I want to say is this: you don't have to believe me that it's the vaccines, but you do have to believe the data is the data, and there seems to be a tremendous amount of silence going on in the absences that we're seeing, the help wanted signs, the excess deaths, and the numbers now are actually worse than the pandemic. So the fact that we're out of a pandemic and the numbers are worse should cause alarm, and you should ask the question, why are the authorities suppressing this information if you don't believe it's the vaccines?
Yeah, well, Edward Dowd, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show. To all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. That's www.workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list there. Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Like I said, get on our mailing list. If you have any questions, email us, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com. I'm sure many of our listeners have questions about this interview, some of the thought-provoking subjects we talked about. So hello@workfromhomeshow.com is where you want to reach out to us. And until next week, keep on working from home.